This is Essie Jewell. This is my lesson plan for AP Biology, sections 4 through 6. Beginning with section 4, activities, we're starting to get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of how we plan to do the actual instruction itself. With section 4, I plan to use a variety of activities to present the material. And these are going to include, but may not be a complete list, I plan on assigning reading every day to be completed before the lesson is presented to the whole group in order to facilitate understanding of the material. I plan to make certain that students have read the material by having a short question-answer session before the lecture to encourage completing that assignment. I plan on lecturing the entire group. I plan to use a PowerPoint presentation with handouts to be completed during the lecture. This is to assist with and teach the art of taking notes, which I think is absolutely essential to success, and especially on the college level. I find that a large number of college students are absolutely clueless initially on how to take good notes, and so I plan on teaching my students how to take notes as we go along. I plan on using a short video presentation to present the material from a different perspective. When it comes to discussing and modeling the proper procedure for the lab, we'll probably follow what is called, kind of in slang, a cookbook version. Basically, we follow a set of predetermined procedures for the lab, complete with explanations and what each step is going to show us, what goals that we're looking for, what we expect to see when we have completed this experiment. And that's the guided part of the experiment. Now, for open inquiry, I want to, and this is student guided, I want students to start thinking about, well, what would happen if I did something different, or if there was something missing from this equation. For example, when talking about protocells and how they formed or might have formed, what would have happened if the pH had been a little bit different, or what would happen if there was more oxygen present, or any number of things that might have affected the outcome of those original protocells. I plan to let students or assist students in filling out the report on their results. Students will then meet back in the classroom to recap key concepts, as well as to recap student reports and to receive new reading assignments. At that time, we'll also go over any questions that students might have about the lecture, or anything they didn't understand about what we were looking at in the lab. I plan to go over that as well at that time. For my material section, I'll need a computer with a smart board for the presentation of the PowerPoints and for the video as well. I'll need PowerPoint copies, one for each student. I need pencils. For lab equipment, I need the microscopes, and we'll need the lab kits for the origin of life. All materials are included in the kit. On the student materials needed, students will need a lab book or a lab notebook, and this is one that they'll need to keep for a record as they go throughout the school year. One copy to be turned in to me and one copy to be kept for their records. They'll need a 5-function calculator, and the reason that I chose just a cheap dollar store kind is because basically that's the kind that'll be used on the AP exam. The AP does not allow graphing calculators. They do allow the little 5-function calculators, but nothing that you can do any kind of recording with. I need a textbook for each student to be able to take home, because there will be reading assignments, and this is on a daily basis. I have a variety of reasons for that, and these include, and again, it's not limited to these reasons, but I believe that it's essential that students come to class at least familiar with the content before I start talking about it. One of the big issues in schools today is the lack of literacy skills, and I think it will help students to be able to read these assignments on a daily basis, and not to overwhelm anybody with homework, but just to make sure that they are reading, that they are pulling out the important information as opposed to teachers pulling it out for them, and just kind of giving little canned lectures where you don't even have to look at the book in order to get everything you need to pass the tests. I feel that students, in order to be prepared for college level work, that they need to start forming really good study habits. They need to be reading the material, and they need to be studying on a daily basis in order to be competitive. For me, evaluations that's a tough one. I plan to use a variety of evaluation techniques. Initially, at the beginning of class, I'll have a short quiz, and this is probably just going to be about 5 general questions, mostly to promote reading of the daily assignments and to make sure that students have read it. I will take up reading guide questions or answered, although for the first lesson there's probably not going to be anything at the beginning of that first class. These study or reading guide questions will be graded in return, since this is where I'll get the end of chapter or the module test questions. In order to teach students how to take notes, I'll begin with handouts to fill out during the PowerPoint and video presentations. From my own experience, I found that was enormously helpful to have some sort of a guideline to help you to take notes, and especially in teaching how to take notes, to pinpoint and to be able to pull out those things that are important in the lecture. And this will kind of give students a little bit of a guideline on how to learn how to do that. I'll ask questions as we go along to see how much of the material that students are absorbing throughout the lecture. For the lab portion of the lesson, I'll have a short quiz before the lab. On that first lesson, we'll probably go over the microscope and the proper use of the microscope, because I plan at that point on orientation day to at least go over proper lab procedure and the proper use and care of a microscope. I will go over the lab in advance, go over each step in the procedure, what we hope to learn from this lab, and then I'll go over what a hypothesis is and how to form a hypothesis, and then how to test a hypothesis. At this point, I want my students to be able to tell me their hypothesis. For example, how does changing the pH affect the formation of a protocell? And when they change the pH, I want to know what they expect to find, and then we'll look at, when they've completed their experiment, were they able to prove their hypothesis? Did they disprove it? We'll go over a certain amount of statistics with each lab. So each experiment will actually be performed in triplicate, so that they can have something to base their statistical analysis on. And then I want my students to report to the entire class what their results were, what their hypothesis was, what their expected result was, and what the actual result was. We'll then reassemble back in the classroom to recap with a question and answer session before moving on to new material. Or if I think that students have some areas where they've not fully understood the material, then I'll present the information necessary in a different format, covering any kind of the concepts that I feel that might not have been fully understood. This concludes my lesson plan, sections 4 through 6. I'd like to thank www.fppt.info for the free PowerPoint template.